Okay, I think I'm now recording, so we're good. I thought we could take a minute to introduce ourselves in case some of you don't know each other. I think I know most of you. I'm Caroline Vickers. I'm faculty director of graduate studies, and I'm going to talk about holistic review and graduate admissions today. All right, so I see Sherry there. Hey, Sherry.
I am the coordinator for the programs in school psychology in the College of Education.
All right, thanks for coming. And Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Nickerson. I just became co-grad coordinator for the biology department.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know that. Congratulations. Welcome to grad coordinating. All right. And Cassandra?
Hi, I'm Casey Harding and I'm in the health science department.
Hi, thanks for coming. And Herb?
Morning, I'm Herb Sean from the School of Social Work, and I'm the graduate coordinator there as well.
Good to see you guys. And Paul?
Hi, everybody. Paul Orwin from biology. Just interested.
All right, awesome. Nice to see you. Hi, David.
Hi, Carolyn. Dave Chavez from Master's of Science in Clinical Counseling Psychology.
Okay, awesome. And Carolyn?
Good morning, everybody. Carolyn McAllister, Director of the School of Social Work.
Yeah, long time no see, huh?
That's right. It feels like it was just yesterday, but it was.
All right, good to see you again. Tom?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Gershon. I'm the coordinator for the Writing Intensive program, and I'm an associate professor in the English department.
All right, thanks for coming. Let's see, I think we have Jeffrey.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff. I'm in the math department, and here I'm interested. I'm also on grad council, so sort of relevant for a bunch of reasons.
All right, thanks for coming. Evangel.
Hi, my name is Evangel. I'm from Health Sciences.
All right, thanks for coming. And Jeremy, I think you just popped in.
Sorry, I'm just getting situated here. Jeremy Murray in the history department, and I'm the grad coordinator for the MA program. The new
brand new MA program. Yeah, thanks for coming. All right, so we'll get started. I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a second. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I'm going to talk about holistic review and graduate admissions. So, you know, in my experience going to Council of Graduate School meetings and Western Association of Graduate School meetings, this is a really hot topic, and it's considered to be best practice for graduate admissions. So I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of the tenets of holistic admissions and also just talk about continuous improvement and, you know, when you do implement holistic admissions. Okay, so moving right along. So first of all, I just wanted to, you know, talk about the graduate student life cycle. So of course, admissions is just the beginning. So we admit students into our programs and we hope to retain those students in our programs. And we hope that they graduate, right, from our programs. So that's the goal. And then ultimately, we hope that they go on to lead fruitful professional lives, and that our programs have had some kind of impact, you know, on that professional life. So all of this stuff is interrelated. So I think the way that we admit students and the decisions that we make can have, you know, a huge impact on how well we retain them, on our graduation rates, and also on people's professional lives when they finish our programs. So what is holistic review? So holistic review is also known as whole file review. So it considers multiple characteristics. And, you know, many of our programs do this. Many of our programs here at CSUSB, our graduate programs, do look at multiple characteristics, you know, but some of them may not. So, but let's think about what these characteristics are. So we are looking at non-cognitive attributes, and I'll get into this in more detail, you know, as we go through. Non-cognitive attributes, context and experiences, and also quantitative variables like standardized test scores and GPA. So those are some of the components of a holistic review. So yeah, holistic review is associated with diversity in higher education. So this is important, and we'll we'll hit on this a couple of times as I go through this presentation. So one of the things that the data demonstrates is that holistic review raises underrepresented minority student enrollment in graduate programs. And this is comprehensively detailed, in a report by the Council of Graduate Schools from 2016. And a lot of what I'm talking about here is in that report. So holistic review is inclusive rather than exclusive. So that's important to keep in mind. So, we're trying to be inclusive rather than exclusive. So yeah, so then why do we conduct a holistic review? So we want to think about, multiple variables when we're looking at admitting students into graduate programs. So traditional criteria like standardized test scores actually have a weak correlation with long-term outcomes in graduate programs. So they might have some correlation in the first term that somebody is admitted to a graduate program in terms of their GPA, but in terms of long-term outcomes, there really is a weak correlation. Also, standardized test scores disadvantage women, underrepresented minorities, and older students in graduate admissions processes. And then they also may miss other talents and skills that are actually quite important to success in a graduate program. So yeah, so that's, a lot of the data on standardized test scores, including data from ETS itself, demonstrates these three things. Okay, so then why would we conduct holistic review? Well, the argument would be, that it's a better evaluation of all students, regardless of their background. And also, holistic review is associated with improved institutional performance on student success measures. So things like GRE scores or GMAT scores, the undergraduate institution that a student attended, and undergraduate GPA by themselves aren't associated with productivity or your graduate school GPA. So those factors alone don't determine the graduate school, your graduate school productivity or GPA. So they might, be a factor in a holistic review, but by themselves, they don't predict necessarily. Okay, so a researcher named Posselt, who's done, a lot of work on holistic review, argues that institutions are not necessarily in tune with the ways that admission processes reflect implicit values. So I'm just going to read this quote from her. Admissions processes evince an organizational culture in which notions of quality are caught up first with prestige and only secondarily with principles of equity and diversity. So I think that's important to keep in mind as we, go through the tenets of holistic review. Okay, so some of the key questions that we might ask in thinking about how we go about the admissions process. So are graduate programs using the best criteria for determining whether a student is likely to succeed while enrolled? So, are we going to retain the student? Is the student going to graduate from the program? And also post-graduation. So yeah, so looking at the criteria that we use in making admissions decisions and trying to determine whether or not that actually is linked to success in the graduate program. So, and we'll talk about this more because I think this is in line with continuous improvement when it comes to admissions processes. So another question to ask, how can institutions ensure that they're accurately measuring a student's fit with the program's academic strengths and their potential contributions to it? So this question, I think, really gets at graduate program identity. Does your program have a mission? Does your program have core values? And would particular student fit with the strengths of that program? Would they be able to contribute in meaningful ways to the program? And then finally, how do admissions processes reflect institutional and programmatic missions? So again, this idea that your program has a mission, it has an identity, and that your admissions processes reflect that. Okay, moving right along. And if there are any questions or comments, feel free, to jump in. I'm cruising along here. We'll have time at the end, of course, for questions and comments too, but. Okay, so what are the characteristics of a successful admissions process? So, how do you define student success in the program? So is it defined by program completion? Is it defined by time to program completion? Is it defined by GPA in the program? Maybe it's defined by productivity in the lab or as a researcher, or maybe by job placement. And there might be other ways of defining student success in a program, but I think it's important for programs to think about what success means. What do we want to see our graduate students accomplish while, in the grad program? Of course, we want to retain them and we want them to graduate. So I think that's a given, right? But at the same time, there might be other factors that are important to success in a particular graduate program. Okay, so in implementing holistic review, there are a few things to think about. So the first is to, of course, consider the program mission and identity. So if a graduate program doesn't have a mission, doesn't have core values, that might be a first step. And thinking about what the mission of the program is and what the core values of the program would be. I think this second point is really important. So we often ask for personal statements, but we don't necessarily think about, what information we're eliciting in that personal statement. So I think we want to write personal statement prompts that elicit relevant information from the applicant, rather than just a vague prompt, maybe prompts that are more directed, so that, if there's certain information we want to know, certain non-cognitive attributes that we're getting at in that personal statement, that we are actually asking for that information in our prompts, right? So, you might be interested in how the applicant overcame adversity. You might be interested in hearing about the applicant's innovations or leadership experiences. So if that's the case, then the prompts ought to direct the person to actually talk about those things. Next, in terms of implementing holistic review, is developing a rubric. So ensuring that there's some sort of rubric in place, so that you have, evaluation criteria that are clear and transparent. And then also, it's important, I think, to identify the barriers to holistic review and then to work to remove those barriers. And there are barriers, and we'll talk about the challenges a little bit later. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about alternative predictors of success. So things besides those cognitive variables like test scores and GPA. So how do you get at these non-cognitive variables? Well, we just mentioned personal statements, and personal statements that are, that have good quality prompts that are well thought out, that elicit the kind of information that you want. Of course, letters of recommendation are another way of getting at these non-cognitive variables. And then various ways of eliciting experiences from students. So whether that's asking for something like a resume, I've seen some programs that actually ask applicants to submit videos where they talk about their experiences, where they talk about their life context and why they want to, pursue a graduate degree in the context of, their experiences. So, there are various ways to get at experiences. And of course, interviews, and we'll talk about interviews in a minute. So yeah, it's important to note that these non-cognitive variables are better predictors of success for underrepresented minority students. So, so we need to be sure that we are listing non-cognitive variables in some way, and looking at those in the context of the larger picture. And then standardized test scores. It's not that standardized test scores don't play any role at all, in an admissions review process. Programs may choose to use standardized test scores, or they may not. If they do use them, they need to be thoughtful about why they're using them. And some of the things that we know is that they should not be the only, standardized test scores shouldn't be the only criteria. I don't think we have a single program on this campus that uses standardized test scores as the only criteria in their admissions process, but that's, an important key point. The other point, and one that might be a little more surprising, and this is actually a recommendation by ETS, is not to use cutoff scores. So, if you don't have above this GRE, then you're not eligible for our program. So that's something that is not good practice. So, you know, the scores again should be looked at in the larger picture of this person and this applicant. And, you know, cutoff scores shouldn't be used. You know, that would be detrimental to some applicants. The other thing is not to add scores together. So don't take the quantitative reasoning section and the language section and add them together to come up with a score. Those sections should actually be looked at separately. You know, I think certainly if you have a quantitative reasoning score that's very low and you're trying to go into math, that might be an alarm, you know, but at the same time, it might not be helpful to actually look at math in combination with language, right? And look at that score as one big score, because then you wouldn't see that there might be this thing that's kind of alarming, or this thing that might be a major strength for this particular applicant. So it's important also to note that standardized test scores routinely underpredict the academic success of underrepresented ethnic and racial minorities. They also routinely underpredict the academic success of women, and they are biased against international students and older students. So, so if using standardized test scores, it's important to understand these things, you know, that they do underpredict the success of particular populations of students. Okay, let's move on and talk about rubrics. So yeah, so the recommendation is really to use formal evaluation criteria and rubrics. So why use rubrics? The idea is that they prompt a reviewer to adopt a more self-conscious and objective approach to evaluation, so that you have a clear set of evaluation criteria in place, and you're sticking, you know, to those criteria. And, you know, as I don't think anybody can really truly be objective, you know, but I think that it tends toward objectivity, and it tends toward self-reflection and self-consciousness and thinking about your review in light of these criteria that have been laid out in the rubric. Okay. So yeah, so some questions to ask about rubrics. So in the context of your particular program, are rubrics provided to faculty and admissions committee members who will be evaluating the candidates? So yes, I mean, do you use rubrics? If you do use rubrics, who develops those rubrics? And are committees tasked with developing rubrics? And then what are the elements of the rubric? So, you know, these are all questions that we should be asking about rubrics. Other questions, is there training or advice provided on how to use a given rubric? So are we providing training on how to use the rubric? Does anyone monitor the use of the rubric to ensure consistency in how it's applied? So that's another important question. Is the rubric reviewed periodically to actually determine how effective it's been in helping evaluate applications? I think this one is so key because, you know, you need to be looking at, you know, the data. So are the students that you're admitting successful? And are there particular criteria that are more predictive of that success than others? And so, you know, you need to go back to that rubric and ensure that the criteria that you're applying are actually predicting success. So I think that's really important, to review the rubric periodically to make sure that it still is doing what you intended to do. Okay. So I think it's also important to think about what you request as part of the admissions process, to understand, you know, all the different areas. So let's start with cognitive skills. So do you request grades? Yeah, well, Title V within the CSU, you know, determines a cutoff for GPA, which is 2.5. So all students entering a graduate program have to have had a 2.5 GPA. You can go as low as 2.0, you know, but you have to appeal. So between 2.0 and 2.5, you have to appeal. So in the Office of Graduate Studies, so our university cutoff for GPA was 3.0 until a couple of years ago. And we actually ran data because we were signing like 600 appeals a year. So we had, you know, so it's not that all of our students had 3.0 or above in their undergraduate career or in their last 90 quarter or 60 semester units, because we were signing so many appeals. So then we looked at the data and looked at those students admitted on appeal, and those students admitted between 2.5 and 3.0 actually, in terms of GPA, had similar GPAs to students admitted above 3.0. So, I think there are lots of reasons that people choose to go to a graduate program. By the time you choose to go to a graduate program, you're typically committed to a particular area of study. And so, and it might be that you were an undergrad years ago, and that you're a very different person at this point in your life. So, so I think it's important to think about, how we look at grades, why we look at grades, those kinds of things. And then also understand how, if we have GPA cutoffs in our programs, how that actually correlates to success in the program, and then test scores, same thing, be very reflective about why we're using test scores. Are they predictive of success in the program? And then what are the barriers, for people if you do use test scores? One thing we know is that older students, for instance, may never apply to a graduate program if they have to go take a GRE. That's, and even younger students. So that's just having a test score requirement in place can be a barrier. So, I think you want to be very reflective. And again, thinking about the mission of your program and the core values of your program and how test scores fit into that larger picture. Not that they shouldn't be used at all, but just that they're used in very reflective ways. Okay, so grades. Yeah, so how do you evaluate the quality of grades from an institution with which you're unfamiliar? I mean, that's one of the things. So, so you have a 2.5 from this university, or you have a 3.5 from this university, but not all universities are the same in terms of, how they hand out grades. I mean, we know that, right? So how do you evaluate that? And then do you have strict GPA cutoffs, or are you flexible? And of course, we're recommending here some flexibility. I have to say that talking to our undergraduate students here at CSUSB, one of the biggest fears that they have is that their GPA won't be high enough for them to get into a graduate program. So it's, and I think that there's a lot of self-doubt anyway, like, am I good enough to go into a graduate program? Well, I mean, if you are somebody who has become passionate about a particular subject area, then your GPA, early on in your and your undergraduate career shouldn't determine your fate, right? We want to open that up for people and be inclusive of people who might actually do quite well in a graduate program. So yeah, I think, we have to think about that flexibility when it comes to GPA, and really think about, if we use GPA cutoffs, why we're using those, and who we might be excluding by doing that. Okay, and test scores. So which admissions test scores, if any, does your program require or recommend the applicant submit as part of the application? And why those test scores? Why those? I think it's important to think about that. And how does your program use the test scores to inform the admissions process? So are you using cutoffs? Are you looking at one component of the test, but maybe not the other? Those kinds of things. So I think it's important to think through those things. Okay, so then non-cognitive variables. So again, what information, if any, do you request as part of the application process to get insight into the non-cognitive attributes of applicants? So what are you looking for? Are you looking for resilience? That could be one thing. I mean, this is just a list. It's not an all-inclusive list. Adaptability, motivation, personal context, so are the, what are the particular non-cognitive variables that you think would lead to success in your graduate program? And are the things that you're asking for from applicants actually getting at those things? So I think that that's, important to think about. And then which personal attributes are you seeking to learn about? We talked about that. Do your prompts elicit this information? And then how do you collect this information? So do you collect it through questions or essays, through interviews? And if you're doing interviews, when in the process are you doing those interviews, and how are you selecting people to participate in interviews? So I think that's, important to think about. Do you do it through letters of recommendation or requests for submission of other kinds of materials? So yeah, I think it's just important to think about how you collect that information on those non-cognitive variables. And if those, collection processes are working, are they doing what you want them to do? Another thing I think that's really important when it comes to conducting holistic review is thinking about the order in which we actually do the review. So we tend to look at GPA first and go, oh no, this person's GPA is too low, or test scores and say, oh no, this person's test scores are too low. But it might be a good idea to actually consider the non-cognitive variables before even looking at the GPA or the test scores. So, think about those things first. And of course, don't use cutoff scores. That's something that has been identified as best practice. Have multiple reviewers so that you're getting multiple perspectives, and then use rubrics so that all those reviewers are, using a rubric and using the same evaluation criteria. Also, develop prompts to measure non-cognitive variables. So all of these things are important, but I think one of the more interesting things that I've read when it comes to holistic review is actually sort of reversing the order in which we look at these different variables. So looking at the non-cognitive variables first, how would that affect who we admit into our programs? Okay, and then some of the challenges associated with holistic review. So of course, traditions, right? We've always done it this way. Why would we want to change? And then adversity to change. So yeah, I think that, that there's a tendency to say, this is the way we've always done it. And so, you might not want to change and do it a different way. The other is time constraints. So I think, and this can be perceived or real, but I think there is more time involved in doing a holistic review process. And especially if you're bringing in multiple reviewers where you've had typically one person who does admissions in your program, you're asking for more time. So that's important to think about, the time constraints and how that can be a barrier. The tools for measuring non-cognitive traits. So how do you develop those tools? How do you make sure that the tools that you're using are actually the ones that are eliciting the information that you're looking for? And then also fear. I think there's a fear that if you drop things like the GRE, or if you change the GPA cutoff, or you don't use cutoffs, that it will lower the standard of the program. But again, that's just not borne out by the data. So we ran the data here at CSUSB. That wasn't borne out, and it's not borne out by data and these larger studies that I've seen. So yeah, so I think that fear can be alleviated just by education. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about continuous improvement in holistic review. So yeah, we want to reflect on student success. So data should inform attributes of students who succeed and don't succeed in the program. So how effective are the pieces of information that you use in making your admissions decisions? And what can be done to improve the admissions process? So these are questions that, we should be asking continually. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but there should be a timeline where you sort of very intentionally ask these questions. So are you measuring your admission structure to evaluate its impact on the outcomes of your admissions? So, do you have diversity goals? Do you have an expected yield, and are you meeting that yield? Do you have to look at faculty availability for mentoring? And, are you admitting the right number of students so that people can engage in high quality mentoring? So all of these things, should be taken into account. So yeah, so if you are measuring these things, what outcomes are you measuring against? And if you're not measuring these things, why not? I guess that would be the question, right? And probably it would be a good idea to do that, to think about what the goals are and to make sure that your admissions processes are allowing you to meet those goals. Okay, do you measure the effectiveness of the admissions process in relation to your program's mission and goals? So if so, how and what outcomes are you measuring against? And if not, why? So again, do you have a mission? Do you have goals? And are you measuring the effectiveness of your admissions process based on that? And then how often do you evaluate the success of your admissions process? So, do you have a timeline for doing this kind of evaluation, for looking at the data and reflecting on the admissions process? So I think that's important to keep in mind. Okay, and finally, I think at the beginning I talked about the graduate student life cycle, but I think it's important to keep in mind that admissions is just the first step to the student life cycle. So we want to make sure that our student services match the diverse needs of newly admitted students so that they're fully and comprehensively supported. So, however we decide to admit students and whatever, types of students we're admitting, I guess you could say, we want to make sure that there are services in place for those students at the university that allow them to be fully and comprehensively supported. So that's it. That's what I have to say about holistic review. And I'm hoping that we can have a bit of discussion now. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other, but I can start sharing again if we want to look at any of these particular slides. All right. Any discussion?
I think that I don't, sorry if I'm just jumping in off on top of somebody else. I think the non-cognitive ones are ones that we do well in our school, but the other piece to that, on the flip side, is that those themselves have, I mean, I've kind of noted over the years, those themselves have a lot of bias against students who are first generation college students, because many of them don't know how to ask, don't know the steps to take to ask for a letter of recommendation that's gonna make them, look good for the graduate program, those kind of things. So I think the flip side of this is preparing the student. And I know we do this some within our information sessions for graduate students, helping students get ready to compete on an equal footing in that graduate admissions process. Because there's, I agree that they're better predictors than test scores. We don't use test scores, but even those have those biases that we have to, that maybe we need to prepare for as we're helping people through graduate admissions, but also really push our undergraduate programs to prepare students for. So I just will stop with that for a second.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, through the Office of Graduate Studies, we do some of that kind of preparation. So we help people with the application, and we also do workshops on personal statements, but maybe something like talking to students about how to ask for a letter of recommendation would be another one that we could do. Yeah, so I think that that's a really good point, that people don't necessarily know how to package themselves in a particular way where they're going to be competitive. So yeah, great point.
I think related to that issue is the fact that I often have those conversations with people in their senior year as they're thinking about graduate school the next year. That's kind of late. And again, I'm as supportive as I can and try and help them to recognize if it's not this year, maybe it could be the year afterwards or the year after that, having done certain things to increase their competitiveness. But it's almost like we have to catch those people, maybe their sophomore year or something, to help them get a sense of what they need to be doing to be able to highlight those kind of non-cognitive components. They're really critical in our program. If you can't just get in, as I say, we could take, everyone 4.0, but we don't. We take people, far below that, because we're interested in those as we're calling them here, non-cognitive kind of aspects. So.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. And, I think it would be great if we could reach students as early as their freshman year, and start talking to them about graduate school and about preparing for graduate school. I think it's, and I think we in the Office of Graduate Studies can think about ways to do that better. one of the things we've done is we've teamed up with the Career Center to start trying to reach students earlier. But I think that there are lots of things that we can do to get out there and talk to students about, and not just for graduate school, but for, anything, for employment later, that they're setting themselves up well to be competitive. Yeah, I think that's a really good. Okay, other points of discussion.
Carolyn, maybe some other folks have had this experience as well, but we've had a few applications come to us from applicants who graduated from undergraduate institutions that don't grade on the letter basis. So that's been a challenge. So we've had to use these non-cognitive measures a great deal more. We're just wondering, is there any data out there that, on their success as well in completing a graduate program and how well they do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And not that I know of. No, there's not, but that's something that we could do here. We could look at students who are admitted from those programs that don't give grades, right? And then, there are ways of translating those things, to grades, so the non-graded systems, they usually have a key on the back of their transcripts that allow you to do that. But like you said, how do those students do in graduate programs?
Yeah, and the universities usually say that a pass actually equals about a B grade, but that may not really help them when they're competing against a particularly competitive pool. So it could work to the disadvantage greatly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I think you're right. I think that's a place that we could do some research and understand better, how that translates to success in graduate programs. Absolutely. Let's see, I've got some questions. I've got a question. So how can we have each department build into their program resume building type things? Students will not be thinking about grad school as students, but if these activities are part of their program, it could pay off by the time they're seniors looking into grad school. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that our Career Center does this kind of work, but then it's not necessarily targeted toward that particular discipline, right? So, you can learn how to put together a generic resume, but if it's not one that's going to be useful for your particular discipline, then, that might not be doing you as much service. So, yeah.
Can I jump in just a second?
Yeah.
So what we did, Jeffrey, we thought about that a lot within our bachelor's social work program. And so what we have done is we require it as part of our senior year internship. So they must come to a meeting with our, like Herb is our field coordinator for our undergrads. And so they must come to him with a resume done. So then we have somebody from the Career Center who has more specialization in our field come in and do a teaching to the class and prepare it. And then we as academic advisors, historically, it's harder this year, but what we used to require as part of a junior advising appointment is that they bring a resume to their academic advisor and the academic advisor would critique it. So we had some built-in ways for them to get prepped. And I did that because my second year here, I had one of my top students give me a resume and it was terrible. It was just terrible. And she had something like a 3.9 GPA and lots of experience, but none of that reflected in her resume. So we started building in a lot of supports earlier in the undergraduate program so that they were coming out competitive for grad school and work. So it's possible. It just takes, I'd say it takes a lot of time, Herb, right? Yeah.
So maybe how can we help departments, sort of all build that kind of the relevant experiences into their program, that's disciplinary specific?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's a great model that social work has built. So maybe we could twist your arms to give a presentation on that at some point, because that sounds like a really, really good model. Yeah. All right, thanks. So any other points of discussion?
I think another question we might have, and this could go out to all of you as coordinators, and Herb, you know, this problem we have is we don't see a first application as the end, right? So let's say a student applies to us and we identify writing, but especially grades. We see students who have poor GPAs, especially towards the end of their academic career. And that's a poor indication, right? If they were a junior or senior and not doing very well academically, that's a concern. So then we may turn around and say to them, we want you to reapply and we want you to work on your GPA to do that. But then it just becomes this real mess. Would you agree that we tell them, let's have you work on some academics and then reapply to us, because we genuinely see some promise in these applicants. But how many classes, what kind of classes, where do they get those classes? Those are all, both schools that I've done graduate admissions at, it becomes this weird vortex where we just, like, we say this and then we don't have any criteria for it.
Well, when I've interacted with some of these folks, I've guided them toward discipline-related types of courses: sociology, psychology, health sciences, things like that, criminal justice. And I usually refer them to community colleges to improve their GPAs overall. But they really could take just about anything just to improve their GPA, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing is that, you know, if like you said, Carolyn, I think if you have somebody whose GPA isn't strong, especially towards the end of their undergraduate career, that's a red flag. But then at the same time, how long has it been since they've been in school, right? So, and what are the experiences that they have between that, you know, those times? So I think that's important to keep in mind. But then something like taking a course, you know, or two, and seeing how they do, you know, might indicate whether or not they are prepared to do rigorous academic work in a graduate program. So yeah, but I think, like you said, identifying the type of course that would be predictive, you know, would be important. And community college is a great option because it's cheap, right? Going through Open University here at CSUSB is expensive. And so you're already making a huge financial commitment if you take a course through Open University. So, you know, and I see students do that, you know, they go and they take courses through Open University to raise their GPA, and they might not ever get into the graduate program. So, you know, I'd be cautious about that.
At the same time, I feel like it's important to see, I mean, community colleges, and again, I may be, you know, full of university elitism or something, but I think that I want to see how they're doing in upper division courses, or even better yet, graduate courses. And so one of the dangers of getting old like I have is that I've been here too long, and so I've seen the different eras. And so we used to have unclassified graduate students, and there were lots and lots of them. And it was always a good strategy for students to demonstrate, because they've been away from school for a while, or because they finally got their act together and they were confident they were in a different place. They could take a couple graduate courses or minimally some undergraduate courses at a reasonable price as unclassified grad students, and was often, you know, we had someone many years ago who had a 1.8 as a kind of college athlete back in Canada 15 years prior, but he came in and he blew every class that he took in graduate school out of the water as an unclassified grad student, and then successfully got in and was one of our star graduates, I think. So it'd be nice if we could find a way that it made it more affordable. And I don't know that that's within your power. I know, Carolyn, you got a lot of power, but it may not be within your power to make that happen. So
I don't know if I don't have the power to make that happen, but it's certainly something that I could look into, because right now we are restricted from accepting unclassified graduate students. But why? You know, I mean, I don't know why. So those are questions that I can ask. But yeah, because, you know, I think that that can be a really important pathway. If you kind of bombed your undergrad and then 10 years later you go back and you want to, you've become a professional and you want to pursue something, that shouldn't be a life sentence. And certainly in terms of the way we admit students in the Office of Graduate Studies, we'll look at graduate coursework by itself, not in combination with anything else. And if they've had 12 units of graduate coursework, and they have been able to maintain a 3.0, because we require a 3.0 in our graduate coursework, then they should be admissible. They're admissible at the university level. The different graduate programs on campus, have different criteria. So they might not be admissible to that particular graduate program. But yeah, so I mean, I think you're absolutely right. So I'll ask about it.
And sometimes, ironically, I think that, sometimes the different pieces don't quite fit together. So we're really interested in helping to support, individuals who are underrepresented and who have, kind of life circumstances that prevent them from performing as well. And yet we also create barriers like financial issues. And I think it's hard to get financial aid. In fact, I don't think you can for open university courses. So, we're creating this, we're saying we're open to it, but there's these other barriers that are created.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's an excellent point. Yeah. So any other points of discussion?
Yeah, so I have a quick thing to throw out to the group here, and I thought this would be a pretty good place to ask this question. So I was thinking about how we, sort of, if we take tests out, we're reducing our number of things we can use, which is, I'm actually fine with taking tests out. But I was wondering what people think of the idea of having students provide with their application a piece of academic writing that they've done. Like it could be a lab report from a class or a term paper or something that was published if they had that as an additional tool. It seems to me like I don't want to have them write another thing. I want to have them give us a piece of their writing and I think, Dan, I'm sure has seen this as well, but writing is a big stumbling block for our graduate students. They think they need to be great at math, but really what they need to be great at is writing, or at least be willing to learn how to become better at writing. So
same for us. Yep.
So I was wondering what people thought of that idea. Something Dan and Laura and I can talk about, but.
I mean, I would fully support it. We have Tom here too. Tom Gershon is somewhere in here. He might have something to say, or maybe he had to leave. I don't know.
No, I'm here. I think it's a great idea, or even a portfolio of work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to make it too onerous, right, for students. I think for some areas a portfolio might be completely appropriate. And actually it might be for us too, but to make it sort of minimally problematic, just say, turn in the thing that you think is the best representation of your writing ability or something like that.
Yeah, I think we do it in English. I mean, I'm from English. That's my home department. And I coordinated that program for several years. And that's just standard in our application is to ask for a sample of academic writing. So I think it's a good idea. And it's not the first time I've heard, by the way, that our students have these issues, our graduate students have these issues with writing, just across the board. So I hear it from programs all over campus. And so actually Tom and I are meeting later today, and we're going to talk about some of these things, some of the supports that we can put into place for graduate students. Especially when it comes to writing. So,
well, I'm teaching the graduate writing class in biology right now. So, along with my experience of mentoring the students who are writing, I'm also actually trying whatever I can. And believe me, I shouldn't be teaching them writing, but I mean, I'm doing what I can. But it's a challenge for them. I mean, and a lot of it is psychological. So if they were able to show us something, and we could then tell them, hey, I saw that term paper you wrote. It was really great. So I know you can do it. I mean, or whatever, that can help too. Anyway,
yeah. Good.
I'm glad to hear people think it's a good idea. I think we'll try to adopt that.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other points of discussion?
If anyone requires the applicants to write a personal statement, don't you catch some of the writing issues in that? I know we do. Yeah. But if, we do use a holistic, basis on evaluating our applicants. So we do look at everything. But I think sometimes we put a notation like they should go visit the writing center if they're admitted.
Yeah, so that, yeah, and I think, you know, and I think that's another thing to think about is the support they get through the Graduate Writing Center. And is it okay? Like, are they getting good support? Tom, I think you were about to pop in.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, that as you all know, the context and the circumstances under which students are writing matter so much, right? So, you know, what a student will write as an undergraduate thesis doesn't, you know, they're still gonna, and you all know this, right? They're still gonna need support at the graduate level too, right? Because it's a whole nother, level, right? And there's a lot of research that shows that as students are engaging in cognitively difficult writing tasks, some of the some of the levels of error can actually increase. So if we're looking at error levels and that kind of thing, you know, you may see that actually go up, right, in a grad program. But the bigger picture is, well, are they learning what it means to write like a grad student, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thanks, Tom. And Dan, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, it was partly in response to the value of the personal statement, that reading the quality of personal statements and also having helped my own mentees to revise their personal statements, I often wonder if what the personal statement represents most is whether or not they had a mentor and then asked for some help in revising it. Because even with not even that much help, the difference between the student's draft and then what actually gets submitted is a tremendous difference. So as far as a writing sample is concerned, I'm actually skeptical of the value of the personal statement. As far as the content of it, that doesn't, I do believe it is the student's content and they're describing their goals, their life. But in terms of as a writing sample, I'm actually a bit skeptical.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it's interesting too, because in my discussions with undergrads who might be interested in going to graduate school, the personal statement is another one of those things that creates huge fear. Like it's, you know, just unbelievable fear. And so, you know, and we do personal statement workshops out of our office and students take advantage of those. But you know, it's interesting that is something that creates such fear. And I think it might be related to, you know, just writing in general. And I think a lot of it is, you know, related to imposter syndrome and who am I to go into a graduate program? And I mean, I don't have anything really great to say about myself when honestly, there are lots of great things, you know, when you sit down with these students, there are tons of great things that they could say. It's just getting it out on paper and all that. So yeah. Dan.
I also taught a workshop for personal statements over the summer. And one of the huge take-home messages for the students is they are way overthinking what it is supposed to be. They often approach it thinking that they are supposed to justify themselves, their lives, every choice they've ever made, etc. And the biggest thing I push them to do is imagine themselves as someone who has to read a stack of personal statements. And don't worry about all these things that you came into this worried that you would have to justify. What are they looking to find out? And it's actually not a very long list of things they have to cover.
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, that speaks to prompts. So if our prompts are really directive, I think that's so helpful for applicants, you know, because then they don't have to guess. They don't have to overthink. It's right there. The instructions are there for them. Yeah. All right. Well, we are running up on the 10 o'clock hour. Oh, you raised your hand. Or what was it raised?
No, I raised it fresh.
Okay, you raised it fresh. All right.
Yes. So so a practical example, which I think could get kind of messy. This is leaving the topic of the personal statement, but just the order in which applicant files are evaluated. In the biology department, because we have a thesis-based master's, which needs to be done in the laboratory, the most important criterion for an applicant getting considered and getting accepted is whether or not they can be paired with a mentor. And that means that in the applicant evaluation process, for all the conversations I have been a participant in for the last 5 years, I would say it's a very holistic evaluation of the applicants. But it doesn't start with any kind of committee or the department as a whole looking through everyone's files. It starts with anyone who's looking for a graduate student. They go to the file and they just start flipping through saying, well, does this person interest me? So they're not really being evaluated on the basis of, can this person in general succeed in the program? It's a question of, all right, is this person a good fit so that I can raise my hand and say I would be their mentor? How does that sound as far as both getting around issues of equitability in the evaluation or actually being a problem with equitability?
I mean, I think, you know, I think that if you're not evaluating people along some similar criteria, then, you know, you're not being objective in that sense, right? I mean, but it's just not. But I would look at things like, you know, are you retaining those students? Are they graduating? And not only are they graduating, but are they graduating in a timely manner? You know, so all of those kinds of things, you know, and really reflect on that process. And, you know, maybe people will, you know, look at particular students as ones that are of interest to them, but maybe there should still be a committee that's actually reviewing those applications, you know, and making a determination about whether or not this person could actually succeed in the program. So that's, you know, those are some of the things that I think should be asked, at least.
Paul and I were talking about that in the background before I brought this up. Yeah, we have been thinking about that.
Yeah, our number of applicants has been traditionally pretty low, and you know, a few, you know, up to maybe 10 a year. So we haven't felt the need. We've got a whole sort of full department. And a lot of them are our own students, right? So obviously a lot of them end up being evaluated by everybody basically. But I think the idea of a committee to do a first pass and sort of, and traditionally also it's fallen on the graduate coordinator, Laura in the past, and now I guess Laura and Dan, which is probably not the right way to do it, honestly. But that's been what we've done.
Yeah, and in line with that, I would think about rubrics and evaluation criteria, and you know what you're looking for as somebody who can be successful in a biology graduate program, you know, generally, and then you know, think about those specifics, like who's going to mentor that person, because being able to have quality mentors is a huge part of how we make admissions decisions.
Yeah. So what we've traditionally done is basically just assume everybody is basically qualified. If a person picks them, then we assume they evaluated them sufficiently to say they're qualified. And unless there's some glaring thing that they missed, we let that sort of move along. That actually, I think, has been very good for bringing in students who would not traditionally make it through these kind of selection processes, right? We've taken a lot of students in who would not have made it otherwise, and they've been some of our most successful students. I mean, I think everybody's got these stories. This is not new to anybody in this group, but so I think it works, but can always be improved. And I think some kind of a committee with a rubric is probably a good way to, if nothing else, flag people as potentially either really good ones who might get missed, or potentially people who might who might struggle, who might need more help. Either way. Anyway, looks like it's 10 o'clock, so I'll shut up.
Great. And Dan, I saw your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to, we'll make you the last comment.
It's okay.
You're good?
No, I think we covered it. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Well, you guys, thanks so much for coming. So this is, you know, I'm hoping actually at some point to take this on the road and go to the different colleges and talk to the departments in the different colleges. So yeah, this is just kind of a first step. Grad Council voted to actually have this as something that we're working on university-wide. So yeah, you'll hear more from me on this. And if you're interested, you know, please contact me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much. Have a great one. Have a good Thursday. Bye.
Bye.